Hello and welcome to another episode of me showing off how I made today's Sadve. Today is the 8th of April 2020 and it's song number 99. What I thought I would do for today, so basically I'll take you through how today went like this. I woke up this morning and went for a walk, and while I went for a walk I had a wee listen to a podcast that I really like, which is Hanging Out with Audiophiles, which is created by Jimmy Liddell, the amazing soul singer guy who, Jimmy Liddell's quite a cool character. He came to my attention in kind of like 2004, 2005, and it was really interesting because he was a soul singer who used looping technology. So he built his own kind of looper on a computer and sort of adapted it for performance, so that he could do these gigs where he would be able to sing live and loop his voice and put it through effects and things like that. And I think he had help with designing that. But anyway, he was always really cool and seemed to be very kind of ahead of the curve in terms of incorporating technology into how he performs live and stuff. But now he's doing this podcast called Hanging Out with Audiophiles, and in the most recent episode 67, he's interviewing William Fields. Now, when I seen this pop up on my phone, I was like, William Fields, I know that name. Why do I know that name? And then I realized it's this guy here who came to my attention via another artist called Richard Devine. But basically, William Fields has this album here called FieldsOS it's on Bandcamp, and it's basically 24 tracks of algorithmic generative music. And what he's done is he's spent apparently around 7 years developing this very elaborate algorithmic computer-based, software-based instrument that generates music, and he's able to let it just kind of create its own tracks and its own music independently, so he doesn't have to do anything. It says down here it's 100% algorithmic music. The probabilities, conditions and constraints were configured in advance. The output was recorded, and this is the result. No curation or editing was done. So essentially, he just hits play on his whatever it is, his machine, his computer software instrument, and hits play, and it outputs all this stuff. And in this interview with Jamie Liddell, he was saying that he changes a few parameters or whatever in order to kind of suit a certain type of genre. There's drum and bass, and there's electro, hip hop, techno, and all sorts of different types. And he was saying for each different type, he just changes a few of the parameters, a few of the settings on his instrument, and then hits the button, hits play or hits record or whatever, and then it just spews out this stuff. And every one of these tracks is, as you can see here, is 59 minutes long. Which is totally unreal. The stuff is amazing. I'll just give you a very quick listen to some of this. So it's quite pretty, and then at times it's quite abstract. Goes into some pretty interesting places there. You can hear all this kind of glitchy sort of stuff going on. It's really very fascinating for me. A lot of this stuff is just completely out there, unconstrained. Yeah, so it gets pretty nutty. And for me, listening to that stuff, it's very, very similar to the kind of stuff that Richard Devine does with his modular synth stuff. So Richard Devine, has built up a career, or built up a sort of reputation for being someone who's really ahead of the curve of all this technology. His Instagram's a great example. Look at all these pictures of all look at this stuff, unreal. It's just Richard Devine's kind of known for incorporating and the hardware and playing with all these toys and using this stuff in really advanced ways. But this William Fields guy has done all this stuff just with software, just with code, And so anyway, it's very fascinating to me, and I was listening to this podcast today just thinking, wow, I really do find all this very interesting. Autechre as well. One of the things about Autechre's output over the last like few years, probably the last 5 or 6 years, it does basically sound very similar to this William Fields stuff. It sounds very generative and automatic and kind of algorithmic. Like for example, they did a 12-hour set, and this was I think this was, well, it says there 2019, but I'm nearly sure it was before that. Anyway, they did this stream, and it was a 12-hour set, and I listened to some of it. I checked in and kind of heard bits and pieces, and again, it did sound very much like this kind of thing of they were taking bits and pieces of songs and sampling them and regurgitating them, and the samples were very chopped up, which brings me onto this thing here. Is very fascinating, right? So what this is here is this neural network generating technical death metal live stream 24/7 to infinity. So this is just a constant stream of this neural network generating. And I think when it says technical death metal, what they're saying is they've taken a bunch of samples from like loads of different death metal records, and just it's some sort of software that's kind of chopping it up and regurgitating it. So let's have a quick listen. The thing that's really fascinating about that is you can hear that it doesn't sound real in a way. Like it does sound like the voice the stuff that you were hearing there sounds very chopped up. It's all but at the same time the whole thing sounds like a singular piece, as in it sounds like a coherent piece of death metal music in terms of like it doesn't sound like it's been electronically produced or whatever. So that's really interesting. And then I was talking to my brother about this today, because my brother's really into like coding, and he's a bit of an IT guy, and we were talking about this kind of thing of like deep what's it called, like deep dreaming, Google's deep dreaming AI stuff, where again it's using this idea of like neural networking to recreate images, and it ends up coming up with these really psychedelic patterns and stuff. It's very fascinating. So that led us on to this. My brother sent me a link to this webpage, which is truly terrifying. It's called thispersondoesnotexist.com. And it apparently these people that you're looking at here are not real people. They're actually like generated by computers. Generative adversarial network, which apparently it's some sort of thing that's like a neural network, but it's actually trying to undo the work that a neural network does or something. It's a bit over my head, but yeah, so these apparently aren't real people. These are actually computer generated images of human faces, which is incredibly terrifying. But we were kind of looking at this earlier on and saying actually sometimes it's funny because they get it, sometimes something goes slightly askew, and like maybe their hair doesn't look quite right, or like here, like this for example, like his glasses, what's happened to his glasses? Like there's a little bit of glasses here, but there's no glasses here. So things like that happen, like little glitches where it's not quite right. It's really interesting. And sometimes the hair, as I say, sometimes it's there'll be a wee glitch with someone's hair, or like their hat becomes their hair. But yeah, these aren't real faces. Apparently, these aren't real people. Apparently, I just find that really absolutely mind blowing. Anyway, so that's me. That's all my that's all the background stuff. Also, as I was looking for stuff earlier there, I noticed this and I got very excited. So anyway, Autechre have 2 new albums on the way, and that's quite fun news. But yeah, so that podcast with William Fields was really fascinating. It was just what he has to say about how he built this whole thing, this whole algorithmic instrument is really fascinating. In this podcast, he's very forthcoming about the whole thing, and he talks about it very candidly about how he does it, and it's just really interesting. If you're in any way interested in how this music is made and stuff, you should definitely have a listen to this. It's really good. Also, one of the things William Fields mentions towards the end, he talks about this record label called Conditional Records, based in Berlin, who do electronic music, and he was saying that yeah, this is some good stuff. And Kind Ohm is also apparently another brilliant artist who does similar stuff in this realm. So there you go. There's all the background. So I was a bit inspired by all of that today, so I thought I would have a go at trying to make some sort of generative piece for the SadFay project today. So I know I'm not really into coding. I don't really know much about this stuff, but I do know that like you can, use Max for Live objects to generate notes randomly and so on. So I started with this object here, which is a Max for Live object called probabilities. And what it does is, just you can set up to 4 values in terms of in terms of rhythm. You can give it 4 different types of rhythm, as in how often it'll play a rhythm, how often it'll send out a MIDI message, a MIDI note. Down here you choose what MIDI note you want. And then over here you can say rest probability, how often it'll just rest and not play anything. So you have some controls. You can say how often it changes, and you can get it to like, so the weighting system here allows you to basically say how strongly weighted you want one of these to be. Like play this one more than these other ones. So I've got 4 here. It's between 1 and 10, or 0 and 10. Sorry. So if I put this at 10 and put these at 0. It's like these will never ever trigger, and this will always trigger. Whereas if I put this like 1, it'll be like 1 in every 10. This one will trigger. But it's a weighted thing, as in it's still random. It won't always be 1 in 10 times. It'll be like, probably 1 in 10 times. Like a probability of 1 in 10 is very likely, but is not definite. It's still a random, it's still a chance thing. You're just that's the reason why they use the word weight, is because you're giving weight to the randomness. You're giving weight to the probability that this might happen. So anyway, you have all those kind of controls over the rhythm. And what I did today was I created 5 of these, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. So 1 for kick, 1 for snare, 1 for the stick sample. So basically I assigned 5 of those probability things to 5 drums on this drum machine here. So I've got the kick and the side stick, the rim shot, the snare, the clap, and the hi-hat. So that's it really. And what that ends up resulting in, let's just have a wee listen here, what it ends up resulting in. Yeah, so basically what it ends up resulting in is quite random patterns of drums there, as you can hear. So the kick, the snare is always, the clap is always doing a clap on the second beat. So it's on the 2 and the 4 of the beat. You always have the clap. Every now and again, there's an extra couple of claps that come in. The hi-hat is doing something more random and a little bit faster. The snare is doing some rolling stuff, and I've also automated the velocity of the snare. So when it does these little rolls every now and again, they kind of swell up in volume and swell down in volume. And that velocity curve there is controlled by an LFO over here. So you can see it says velocity here. So I've got this LFO, which basically means it's like, as you can see in this wee graph, it's changing the velocity in this way, at this rate and this curve, and I have control over how fast it changes the velocity, so I can speed that up if I want, or slow it down, or whatever, change the shape of it, change how deep it goes, change how much it changes. So there's all these LFO settings for how the velocity is changed on that snare sound specifically. The kick sound as well, like it generally it'll always strike on the 1, but then I decided later on that I'd have it rest quite a lot, so I've got the rest probability quite high, so the kick doesn't always play, so setting those rest probabilities can be a nice way to create variation. For the snare, I turned the rest probability down completely because I always wanted the snare to be present to kind of keep the the sort of backbeat. So So you can hear like it's doing little patterns and doing little variations and stuff there. So it's nice. Like it sort of doesn't stay the same. It keeps kind of changing. Not completely changing, not changing in a very dramatic way, but the patterns are shifting around a fair bit. The kick and the snare patterns are moving around quite a bit, so it's not too repetitive and not too samey. So that's basically all the drums. I just contained all that stuff. So basically 5 drum hits, and they're just playing different patterns. I contained all that inside one track, and that's fine. It's doing its own thing. But for the other instruments, there's a little bit more complexity going on. So to get into this, it gets a little bit technical here, folks, so bear with me. So inside this group here called separate chords, as you can see, I'll just open this out. There's 4 tracks, right? And each track has a synth, and it's a copy of this synth called Total Random. Oh my god, Total Random! And it's a really nice wee sounding synth. So what it does, what it can do, it has this little button where random button. If you hit the random button, it just completely creates a completely new preset. Like it just randomizes the values of all of these values, all these different aspects of the sound. You can see it doing it every so often here. See, every time it flashes there. So basically what I've done is I've set up this LFO over here, and I've set it to be binary, as in it'll only ever jump between on and off. But I can set how fast it jumps from on and off. I can set offset, like what value it jumps on and off to or from. But in this case, I've just set it to go on and off at a fairly slow rate. And what it's doing is it's hitting that random button for me every so often. You can see it kind of blinking there. Basically that means that every time it hits that button, it's creating a new preset for me. So it's really nice. It means that as this sound is playing, it'll just suddenly jump into another sound and into another sound and into another sound. So it's constantly changing, and it's quite fun. So I'll let you hear a quick blast of that. Turn everything else off. So the thing is, the way I set this up was because I created 4 of these, basically 4 of the same thing. They're exactly the same thing in all 4 of these, but what I changed was the values of this randomer here. So this random object here is choosing different notes for this thing to play, and I've changed the range. So in the first one, I've changed it so that it has a choice of 8 notes within a certain scale inside a sort of lower scale. And if I go into this, I've created this little clip here, and it's playing this like C2 note, and then the random device is going to choose a different note every time that C plays. It's going to play something else. Every time I hit the note C, I get a different note. But it generally stays in the lower range of the keyboard pitch. So then we have low mid, which is the same thing, but this time the choices are ranged a little bit more. So we've got a potentially higher scale of notes that can be triggered. So let's have a listen. So as you can hear, slightly higher pitch than the previous one. There's lots of effects on this as well. There's lots of like reverb and panning and stuff. So this is like a real ambient sort of texture that I was trying to create. And then this one is again same thing again, but like higher. So we've got a higher range of note choices and a higher scale range of scales that I can choose its notes from. And then for the 4th one again, I just went back to sort of lower again for the last one. I'm not sure why I did that actually. Maybe I was just trying to like tie the first 2 together or something. But yeah, so when you hear all 4 together, so let's have a listen to all that. Let's trigger these all together. So it's just really kind of created this sort of ambient texture. You know, the pitch of it is quite sort of random and not very clear. And then we've got this auto pan thing that's kind of just going up and down in terms of its rate. And that rate is controlled by an LFO over here. So I created a track with a bunch of LFOs in it. They're doing different things on different tracks. But on this particular track, it's controlling the rate of this pan. device. And here going, so that was kind of fun. Anyway, so that's that. That's a separate chords device. It's 4 different synths playing different notes at the same time, put through a load of effects and creating this nice ambient texture. Over here we've got kick chords. Now this is a real fun one. This one is triggered by the kick. So in the drum channel, if I play the drums here again, let's just have a wee bit of the drums. So what's happening is every time you hear the kick, what happens, you can see here on this drum rack, the wee light lighting up here, this wee yellow light. So what I done was I created a MIDI track on Ableton, and I basically took that MIDI information that's going into this little kick sound, and I took it and put it into this track here. So you can see it says there MIDI from drums, so it's coming from the drum track, and then it's saying underneath there's a wee option. So what I did was I assigned it to this kick. So basically it's going MIDI from drums and the kick. So the kick is coming in here into this channel. But what's in this channel? Well, it's another one of these total randoms. Ooh, it's a total random synth again. And what I'm doing this time is every time the kick is triggered, it is going in here and triggering a chord inside this synth. But I'm using the random device again so that the chords notes are randomized. So let's have a listen to what it sounds like. So as you can hear, every time the kick sounds, we're getting a random chord sound as well. So that's that. I thought that was quite a nice wee fun thing to do. And I did the same thing with the bass. So the bass over here is a different instrument this time. It's an operator, just a simple operator bass sound with a bit of distortion on it. Although I did automate the release time. So as you can see this little tail thing here moving in and out. That's the release time of the actual bass sound. So this little LFO MIDI thing is automating that release sound. But yes, so this is just our bass sound, and the bass is doing exactly the same thing as that little chord thing I just showed you. So it's receiving its MIDI from the drums, it's receiving its MIDI from the drums and the kick sample. So it only sounds on the kicks as well. So let's have a listen to just the bass and the drums. So sometimes the notes go, they hold out for a little longer because of this release thing. So yeah, it's also choosing random notes, but I restrained the notes a little bit more to a lower range. I also reduced the pitch a couple of octaves and like nearly 3 octaves, so that the note wasn't too high, because I wanted to be in that lower range, that bass range. So yeah, that's basically it. So those 3 items there, they're all doing the same thing. They're all kind of like, well, the drums are the kick from the drums is triggering the bass and this chord thing called kick chords. So it's so yeah, that's those 3 items. Then what do we have? Random chords, again, very similar thing, using this total random synth again, and it's choosing random notes, but this time I've created a clip inside the synth. This clip here just has a bunch of random notes. It has 6 random notes that I just chose arbitrarily. Let's have a listen. So yeah, what's really nice about this is when you have like 6 notes inside a clip, and then you have a random device, the random device actually chooses a random note for all 6 notes inside that clip, which I thought was interesting. I never knew it did that before. That was something that was new to me. So basically it's just generating these really interesting chords every time you hit it, every time it triggers. I've also got this MIDI thing again, LFO MIDI, which is hitting the random button on this synth, so I'm getting these random patches being spewed out of this thing, which is fun. So yeah, really, really nice. I love the sounds. I love the way that's a bit glitchy and a bit wrong, and the pitches are all quite dissonant and strange. So yeah, so those two things are like the random chords and the separate chords things. They're both very similar. The difference being basically this one's put through loads of effects and made more to sound like an ambient backing thing, and this one's more upfront and dry. So even if you actually listen to the two together, you'll hear like this. You'll hear the difference. Like, so let's just actually play them together. So I just go actually be sure if I did this. Just play them all together. Yeah, so you can hear the more direct upfront sounds here from the random chord, plus these like more background sounds that are like more ambient textures. Together they're quite nice actually. Complement each other quite well, I think. So last but not least, actually there's two more items. Second last but not least. Penultimately last. No, penultimate. Shut up, Marty. Shut up, Martin. You just try to be smart and you failed miserably. You fool. Anyway, prepared chords is another one of these total random synths. This time I'm using an arpeggiator and the random and a wee bit of delay, and I turned it up a fair bit. And we get just something a wee bit squelchy and rhythmical. A bit more spacey, isn't it? Just doing some fun stuff. So, and then finally the sports channel here, the sports track. I just grabbed a bunch of random sound effects of like sports stuff, like people playing football and baseball and playing cards, just because it sort of sounded nice and clicky. It had this kind of nice clicky noise to it. It was like click, 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 click. So I took those random samples and I put them through a bunch of effects, just loads of effects: skitter, frequency shifter, corpus, you know, as you can hear. Just doing some interesting jumps and glitches. I used one of the LFOs to randomize the skitter. Not randomize, sorry, to slowly change the value of the skitter effect. Skitter is basically just like a tremolo pedal. It's just like an off and on switch. So it cuts the audio in and out. So yeah, that was quite fun. So that's all the sounds that I created for this track, but that's kind of only half the story. So I got everything kind of playing, and I got all the randomization out of all these different instruments to, you know, in a way that I was quite satisfied with. But what I wanted to do was be able to like hit play on this song and then just leave it and not have to touch it again until the song was finished. That was my sort of like that was my real goal. It was like, can I set this up so that I don't really have to do anything once I hit play? It'll just carry on. It'll play all its bits and then it'll stop when it's finished. So what I did was I relied on these clips here in this session view. So you see some of these clips that say stop on them. Stop. Every track, as you see here, has a stop clip on it, and as you can probably guess, those clips tell the song to stop, or tell that instrument to stop playing. Now the way I tried to set it up was on some of the tracks the stop clip is random, and on other tracks it isn't. In other words, some tracks would just stop themselves randomly. Other ones I didn't let it randomly stop. I chose a specific amount of time before it stopped. So for example, this sports track, all these samples, right, what I've done was, if you go into one of these clips and you open it up, over here you'll see launch mode, and you can give it follow actions. So what that means is, like, I can tell this particular clip that when it's finished playing, when it's done its bit and it's finished playing, it can either like, it can go on, it has a follow on action, it can stop playing, or it can go back to the start. It can play the previous clip, it can play the next clip, it can just play a random clip anywhere in this list. And the idea is that I give all of these clips a random choice. So basically here you can see this little star symbol. It means other. So you have a choice here. As I say, you can make it stop, you can make it play again, you can make it play the previous, the next, the first, the last. It can play any, which is like a random thing again. It can play any, but other is like it can play any except itself, basically. So when you pick other, it's like, don't play yourself again, just play something else. So I set up all of these clips to be other except for these two. So one of them is an off clip, and it just basically tells it to, well, sorry, it does tell it to play other when it's finished, but for the duration that this clip is playing, it turns off the channel. So you can see here it says off, speaker off. So whenever this clip is triggered, it just turns that track off, so that you have nothing for a little while, and it'll do that for 4 bars. So it'll play nothing for 4 bars, and then it jumps to something else. But if it jumps to this, might stop. It might stop. Basically, it might go to stop, or it might jump to another. So I gave it 2 options there. I gave it like, you can either stop or you can go to another one, and I weighted them equally. So these numbers underneath are the weights. So basically they're equally weighted, so it's a completely 50-50 chance whether or not it's going to stop or whether it's going to go to another. But the funny thing was, when I actually ended up recording this song, when I ended up recording this, it played about 2 of these samples and just immediately jumped to this and then stopped. And I was really angry about it. I was like, no, because I was hoping that, you know, this would be this lovely ambient thing, this textural thing that would happen throughout the song. But it literally, I think it's only in the song for about 10 seconds, and it just jumped straight to the might stop, and then just stopped. And then we never hear from it again. It's like, ah. So that's the way it works, you know. That's kind of the fun of, you know, randomization and stuff. So however, with these other tracks, what I did was, first of all, I created a little gap. So I created a completely empty, a bunch of empty slots here, as you can see at the top, and they're all little they're actually not empty slots, they're all little clips. I just colored them differently, but if you go into the clips, it shows you here. I wanted them all to play for 1 bar and then to follow on to the clip below it. So they're all set up to just play for like basically like 2 seconds, and then they all just jump into the next line of clips. It was just a way to program in a wee sort of second of silence, or so, a couple of seconds of silence before the song kicked off. It was really the whole point of that. And then once it kicks off, there's a bunch of these things have random cues. Like, so this one here, it's like these, as you can see, these ones start as being switched off, and they're all set to be off for a specific amount of time. So like 90 bars. So this little separate chords thing, these don't come in until sort of 90 bars, and that means they don't come in until about halfway through the song or until towards the end of the song. Whereas like the drums come in and they play for actually they don't play for 2 bars. So there's 2 bars of silence here where they don't do anything, and then they play for 150 bars, and then they turn themselves off. Yeah, so all these other ones, they actually have their own, they're all prepared. Like I pre-programmed how long each one was going to play for, like 24 bars for this one, 64 bars for that one. You know, I kind of just put all those values in myself before I recorded the song, so that all these different parts would come in and out at specific times. Like the bass part doesn't come in straight away. It doesn't come in for the first 32 bars. There's no bass part, and then the bass comes in, and then it goes off, and then it comes in again for 8 bars, and then it goes off again. So yeah, so it was just a way of kind of programming in some structure to the whole thing, programming in a sort of an arrangement of when the bits were going to come in and out. And that was sort of my way of being able to go, I'll just like trigger this thing, and then I won't touch it again. So like, let's just have a listen. Like, so if I just hit this now, it's going to just do its thing again. Yeah. So it's just going to play like that for, you know, whatever it was, like 5 minutes or so, and then eventually it'll just stop, and it'll get to the point where all the instruments just stop themselves. So that's pretty much it. Hopefully that was interesting or useful to anybody watching this. I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching, and be sure to keep tuning in to the SadFay project. That's about it for now. If you have any questions or anything, let me know. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Cheers.